My name is Ava Sinclair. I'm 33 years old, a senior investment strategist at one of the top firms in San Francisco. I manage portfolios worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. And yet, despite all of that, I've never once heard my father say he was proud of me. Not once. And this year, I thought I'd finally earn it. It was mid-June when the annual Sinclair Father's Day brunch invitations went out. A carefully curated affair hosted by my parents in their sprawling Palo Alto estate. What's marketed as a family brunch is really a who's who of Silicon Valley power players and business allies who orbit my father's world like satellites around a dying star. That star? Gerald Sinclair, my father. Founder of Sinclair Dynamics, the software empire that became a household name in the early 2000s, and then an unstoppable titan in AI infrastructure. To most people, he's a visionary. To me, he's a shadow I've spent 3 decades trying to outrun. This year, I made a decision I told no one about. I bought him a Tesla Model S, midnight gray, fully loaded 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. The man had once mentioned admiring that exact model at a Stanford reunion. So I bought it. Not for show. Not to flaunt my promotion or income. I bought it hoping that, just once, he'd look at me the way he looked at my older brother Brandon. Brandon, of course, is the crown jewel of the Sinclair line. 2 years older than me. Graduated from our father's alma mater, joined Sinclair Dynamics straight out of college, and now runs the real estate acquisitions arm. Everything he does, even his mistakes, are framed as strategic experiments. When he blew $4 million on a failed metaverse land deal, Dad called it visionary risk. When I brought in a $30 million portfolio gain last quarter, "That's good," Gerald had said flatly. "But finance is always smoke and mirrors. Let's see how you handle a real downturn." And then there's Chloe, our younger sister. Beautiful, soft-spoken, strategic in her own way. She never pushes back, never stands out too much. She's Dad's peacekeeper. She hosts charity auctions and attends foundation events. She once got him to smile on a day he was furious about a lawsuit. That's her superpower. Easing him without challenging him. I used to envy that. I've always been the difficult one. Too opinionated, too ambitious, too much like someone else, though I never knew who that someone was. Growing up, I lived with this constant sense of trying to earn my place, to matter. I worked harder, got better grades, was the only one to graduate college on a full merit scholarship. Still, I was never a natural Sinclair. That's what my father said to me once. Like I was a puzzle piece forced into the wrong box. My mother, Loretta, is a contradiction I still don't fully understand. Warm when we're alone, but brittle when Dad's in the room. She's the kind of woman who plans floral arrangements down to the stem, who brushes off backhanded compliments with a laugh, who never confronts, only redirects. And she always redirected his criticism. "He doesn't mean it like that," she'd whisper after another verbal gut punch. "He's just under pressure." But the pressure never stopped. Neither did the disappointment. Until a few weeks ago, when I got my long-awaited promotion, senior investment strategist, the youngest in my firm's history. My bonus was enough to pay off the last of my student loans, take a trip to Greece, and yes, buy a car that costs more than most condos. Instead, I bought the Tesla. I told myself it was a celebration, but in truth, it was a peace offering. I imagined him walking outside, seeing that car, and finally breaking character. Maybe he'd put a hand on my shoulder. Maybe he'd smile. Maybe he'd say, "You've done well, Ava." I arranged to have the car delivered to a private showroom near their estate a few days before the brunch. I picked it up myself, parked it in their driveway, placed the key inside a velvet box. I even practiced how I'd present it. "Dad, I thought it was time you had something extraordinary, too." Pathetic, right? But when you've spent your entire life trying to win something as basic as a father's approval, you start thinking in grand gestures, big moves, public wins. I spent that week preparing for the brunch like it was a product launch. I shopped for 3 weekends straight, settled on a navy sheath dress from a designer I knew my mother liked, polished, elegant, understated. My hair was blown out to soft waves, my heels were expensive but not flashy. I even had my nails done in a shade called muted ambition. Because God forbid a woman look too hungry for attention. The night before the brunch, I arrived early to deliver the gift. My father answered the door in khakis and a crisp polo, checking his watch like I was already inconveniencing him. "Ava, you're early. Brunch isn't until tomorrow." "I know," I said, pulse racing, "but I wanted to give you something ahead of time. Privately." I handed him the box, watched his fingers open it slowly. When he saw the Tesla key, his brows lifted for a fraction of a second, then fell. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, come look." He followed me to the window. The car gleamed like a mirror in the fading daylight. He blinked. Is this for me?" I wanted to say thank you. For everything. And to celebrate my promotion. He didn't hug me, didn't smile, just stared at it like it was a complicated equation. "This is excessive, Ava. A little performative, don't you think?" He took the key, walked outside, circled the car twice, and asked about taxes and maintenance. He didn't ask about my promotion. He didn't ask how I was. He drove it once around the block, then parked it in the garage, not the driveway where guests could see it. That night, I called my best friend Maya. I cried into the hotel pillow, mascara streaking the sheets. "You should take the damn car back," she said. "He doesn't deserve it." I just thought this time would be different. It never is. I stared at my purse on the nightstand. Inside it was something else I hadn't told anyone. A sealed envelope, a DNA test result. One I hadn't meant to use. Unless I had to. And tomorrow I might. I didn't sleep much that night. Even in the plush sheets of the hotel I booked for its proximity to my parents' estate, I tossed and turned. Replay after replay of my father's reaction to the Tesla churned in my mind like a broken reel. No thank you. No pride. Just questions about insurance, taxes, and an offhand remark about optics. It wasn't just about the car. It never was. That Tesla was the physical embodiment of every honor roll, every internship, every promotion I'd scraped together without a drop of Sinclair privilege. And he dismissed it like an invoice. By 5 a.m., I was sitting on the balcony with a cup of bitter hotel coffee, watching fog roll over the hills. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "You good?" I typed and deleted 3 responses before sending. "Brunch starts at noon. I'm going." Her reply was instant. "Ava, you don't owe him anything. You've proven enough." I didn't respond, because somewhere deep inside, I knew I hadn't stopped trying. At 10:45, I started getting ready. I applied my makeup with the precision of a surgeon. I wore the dress I had so carefully chosen, the heels that whispered rather than clicked. My hair was curled and pinned in a half-up style I knew my mother approved of. It wasn't just brunch. It was a performance. And like any stage production, it required preparation. As I gathered my things, I glanced at the nightstand. The envelope was still there, sealed, heavy, silent. 3 months earlier, I'd spit into a plastic tube out of pure curiosity, an ancestry test. Something fun, something trivial. I thought I might learn I was 10% Norwegian or 8% Iberian, but what I got instead was a glaring red notification, paternal DNA inconsistency. I blinked, reread it, thought it was a glitch. But the more I looked, the more obvious the gap became. The DNA didn't align with Gerald Sinclair. Not even close. And once I started seeing the differences, I couldn't unsee them. My dark eyes, my sharper jawline, the way I challenged authority instead of absorbing it. It took me 2 weeks to decide whether to confirm it, another week to sneak into my parents' house while they were out and collect a sample from my father's hairbrush. The lab test came back a week later. Conclusive. Gerald Sinclair was not my biological father. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Maya. Not until last night. I'd been carrying that truth in my purse ever since. I told myself I didn't need to use it. That it was for closure, understanding. But even then, I knew. If he pushed me far enough, humiliated me in front of that room full of people like he always did, then maybe I'd finally stop pretending. At 11:30, I pulled into the circular driveway I knew like the back of my hand. The Sinclair estate hadn't changed in 20 years. Manicured hedges, immaculate windows, stone lions flanking the front doors, like guards protecting the kingdom of appearances. As I stepped out, I noticed the Tesla, my Tesla, no longer in the garage. My father had moved it, front and center, right in the driveway, where guests couldn't miss it. I stood there for a moment, stunned. He'd hidden it the night before, and now it was his pride piece. I watched him through the living room window, already leading a small group of men, his old Stanford buddies, I guessed, toward the car like it was a product showcase. He was smiling, animated, his hand on the hood like he'd built the damn thing himself. I exhaled and walked to the door. My mother answered before I could knock, her arms wrapping around me in a gentle, lavender-scented embrace. "You look lovely, darling," she said, brushing an invisible thread from my shoulder. "Your father's in the front, entertaining the Stevens group. They're very impressed with the Tesla." "Are they?" I replied dryly. "He mentioned you bought it for him. That was generous." Her voice softened on that last word, like she wasn't sure how to interpret it. "It was a gift," I said simply. "I wanted to mark the occasion." "You've always had such a big heart," she said, which felt like both compliment and deflection. "Come, say hello to the Chen family. They just flew in from Taipei. They remember you from your college days." And with that, she ushered me into the glittering mass of Sinclair-approved guests. The brunch was its usual performance of curated perfection. Waiters floated by with champagne and artisanal pastries. A string quartet played Vivaldi under the pergola. Conversations were clipped, elegant, engineered. Everywhere I turned, someone smiled and asked polite questions. Was I still in New York? Was I still single? Was it true I'd bought Gerald the car? "Yes," I replied. "Yes, and yes." When I finally saw Brandon arrive, with his perfectly coiffed wife and their 2 blonde children, I knew the stage was set. My father greeted them at the door with a bear hug and a booming, "That's my boy," before clapping Brandon on the back and pointing toward the Tesla. "Your sister's got taste," he said. "Knew you'd appreciate it." I stood 20 feet away, invisible. No mention of my promotion, no mention that it was my money, my gesture. Chloe found me near the mimosa bar where I'd begun quietly contemplating whether spiking the orange juice with tequila was a good idea. "Hey," she said, pulling me into a brief, genuine hug. "That car? Insane. You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. She didn't push. She never does. But her hand lingered on my arm for a moment longer than necessary. Silent solidarity between siblings who had both learned to read rooms like weather forecasts. As more guests arrived, my father moved between groups like a campaigner, shaking hands, telling stories, laughing too loudly, occasionally tossing in phrases like legacy, vision, and the next frontier. And all the while, the Tesla sat like a trophy he had earned. Not once did he mention me. Not once did he say thank you. By the time we were seated for the meal, I felt the envelope in my purse burning against my side like it had developed a heartbeat. That's when I knew. I hadn't brought it just in case. I'd brought it because some part of me, maybe the only honest part, had already decided this was the year I'd stop being silent. The Sinclair brunch was well underway, and I was doing what I always did at these things: smiling, sipping, performing. It was like being cast in a recurring role, the overachieving daughter whose successes somehow still registered as supporting details in someone else's story. I sat at the long stone table beneath the patio awning, tucked between a cousin I barely remembered and one of Dad's mentee CEOs, a guy named Kyle who spent half the meal pitching a logistics app no one asked about. My father sat at the head, of course, commanding, regal. He wasn't just the host of this brunch, he was the centerpiece. His voice carried, full of polished anecdotes and thinly veiled boasts. Occasionally, he'd gesture toward Brandon, recounting another deal closed, another client saved, another moment of golden boy magic. Every time he spoke, the same thought drummed in my head like a warning bell. He knows. He has always known. I glanced down at my purse, which rested discreetly in my lap. Inside it, tucked neatly between a lipstick case and my phone, was the envelope. Still sealed. Still unopened in front of anyone but me. 3 months ago, I'd opened it alone in my apartment, shaking so badly I spilled tea down my shirt. The lab results had been definitive. Zero biological connection to Gerald Sinclair. Not a partial mismatch. Not an error. A clean sever. Genetically, I wasn't his. Emotionally, I'd known that for years. He'd never hit me. Never screamed. But his absence, his rejection, was just as violent in its precision. Every compliment to Brandon came with a silence toward me, every backhanded remark, every denial of praise, each instance a cut, paper-thin but cumulatively deep. I didn't need a lab to confirm what my gut had told me since I was 12. Still, I wasn't sure if I was going to reveal it. I'd told myself I wouldn't. That the truth wasn't a weapon. That I could move on quietly, but watching my father now, surrounded by admiration, smugly accepting praise for a car I bought, and claiming it as some reflection of his legacy, I felt the old pressure rise in my chest. He wasn't just indifferent to my success, he had repurposed it as his own. "Your daughter bought you a Tesla?" one of the guests asked him mid-meal. My father chuckled. "She's always had a flair for grand gestures," he said. "Reminds me of myself at her age." He wasn't even being cruel, just casually rewriting the truth, as if I were a footnote in his biography. That's when it hit me. This man wasn't just incapable of loving me, he was incapable of seeing me. I excused myself from the table, walking back through the French doors into the kitchen. I needed a second. Air. Distance. Something. Chloe followed, pretending to look for a wine refill. "He's being awful," she whispered, gently placing a hand on my back. "I'm fine," I said automatically, which of course meant I wasn't. She looked at me with knowing eyes. "Ava, you don't have to prove anything to him." I opened my mouth to reply, but was interrupted by the sound of my father's voice, drifting in from the living room, loud, clear, confident. "All 3 of my children are gifted in their own ways," he was saying to a small crowd of business partners. "But Brandon? He's the one who really gets the instincts. The drive. It's in the blood, you know? It's in the blood." He always said that. "It's in the blood." I froze. The man didn't even realize how cruel that was. Not just figuratively, but literally. I wasn't in his bloodline. He knew that. He had to. And yet, he continued to use it as a weapon. A mantra. A boundary I was never meant to cross. Chloe looked at me. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She saw it on my face. The moment I shifted. I walked back outside slowly, letting the sun hit me full in the face. As guests finished their dessert, The waitstaff cleared plates. The brunch was winding down. My father stood up, raising his brandy snifter. Here it came. The traditional Sinclair toast. "Friends, family," he began, that smooth, practiced cadence filling the space like a keynote address. "Each year, I stand here with greater gratitude. To see what this family has built, what we continue to build, is a testament to discipline, tradition, and knowing your place in the legacy you represent." He smiled toward Brandon, who beamed like a pageant winner. "And of course, my son," he gestured toward him, "has shown exactly what it means to carry that name with purpose." There it was. No mention of me. Again. I felt my hand drift down to my purse. My fingers found the envelope without looking. Cool. Thin. Devastating. He continued. "Success doesn't come from rebellion, it comes from respect. From understanding the foundation laid before you and building from it, not against it." My chest tightened. "You see," he said, raising his glass, "some people believe success is about personal gain, but true success is generational. It's inherited. It's earned through blood." There it was again. Blood. I stood. The movement was subtle but caught attention. The chairs shifted. The room stilled. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't smile. I just stood tall and steady, the envelope now in my hand. "Thank you, Dad," I said, loudly enough that heads turned. "For that enlightening toast." My voice didn't shake, not once. Before we wrap up this celebration of legacy and bloodlines, I think it's time we had a real conversation about what defines family. His eyes narrowed. My mother looked pale. Brandon froze. Chloe didn't move. I took 2 steps forward and gently placed the envelope at the center of the table, right next to the untouched dessert tray and the crystal carafe of scotch. "This," I said, tapping the envelope once, "contains something you already know. Something you've always known." He said nothing. The silence that followed was taut as wire. "You've spent your life pretending I'm a disappointment," I continued, "when the truth is, I was never even a candidate in your rigged competition. And I finally know why." Someone gasped. Someone dropped a fork. The word DNA wasn't even necessary. And still, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at the man who had refused to see me and finally realized I didn't need him to. "I bought you that car hoping you'd see me as worthy, but it's not your approval I needed," I said. "It was mine." I turned and walked away, heels clicking softly on the stone, leaving the envelope unopened and the lie it contained fully exposed. I didn't look back, not when the gasps echoed through the backyard. Not when my father's voice called out after me, sharp, panicked, like he finally realized I wasn't bluffing. I just walked. Across the stone path, past the string quartet who had gone completely silent, their bows frozen midair. Through the open French doors, into the cool interior of the house where I had grown up being measured, compared, and dismissed. My heels clicked against the marble floors. My pace was slow, deliberate, not rushed, not emotional. Behind me, I heard chairs scrape back and the quiet swell of voices. Some hushed, some incredulous. I imagined cousins whispering, uncles pretending not to eavesdrop, and my mother frozen in that familiar, fragile way, torn between shock and control. But I didn't stop walking, because I had said what I needed to say. And for the first time in my life, I had said it for myself. When I reached the foyer, I paused. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass window above the door, casting colors on the hardwood. For a second, I saw my 10-year-old self standing there in Mary Jane's and a piano recital dress, waiting for my father to notice me. He never did. And that girl? She deserved more. I pulled the spare key fob from my purse and walked outside. The Tesla, his supposed trophy, sat gleaming in the driveway, still parked for admiration. But it wasn't his anymore. Not emotionally. Not legally. I unlocked the doors with a soft chirp, slid into the driver's seat and took a slow breath. The leather still smelled new, untouched, clean. In the rearview mirror, I saw figures rushing to the front door. My mother, Brandon, someone I didn't recognize, then Gerald. He burst through the doorway, waving the opened envelope in one hand like it was a lawsuit. His face was red, veins standing out in his neck, mouth open in fury. Or maybe something deeper. I couldn't hear the words through the windows, but his body language said it all. A man who had always controlled the story, now grasping for a page he didn't write. The engine purred as I reversed down the long circular drive. As I turned onto the road, the estate shrank behind me in the rearview mirror, brick by brick, lie by lie. And still, I didn't cry. My phone buzzed nonstop. First Chloe, then my mother. A string of unknown numbers, a text from Brandon that just said, "You crossed a line." I didn't reply. The silence inside the car was the most peace I'd felt in years. I drove straight into the city, booked a suite at a downtown hotel on autopilot. When I finally stopped moving, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, still clutching the key fob like a lifeline. It hit me then. Not sadness, but clarity. I had been trying to win a rigged game. Every A on my report card, every unpaid internship, every presentation, every late night in the office, all of it was an offering at an altar that never accepted me. Because it wasn't built for me. He had known I wasn't his. I saw it in his eyes today, the flicker of panic, the recognition. The years of subtle cruelty made perfect, devastating sense. And now, the mask had fallen. Later that night, I finally listened to the voicemails. Chloe's first. "Ava, please call me. It's a mess here." Then my mother. "Sweetheart, I don't know what to say. I never wanted it to come out this way. Please, call me." And then, Gerald's lawyer. A dry, formal voice. "Mrs. Sinclair, this is to notify you that Mr. Sinclair is pursuing recovery of personal property, specifically the vehicle." I laughed out loud when I heard that one. Because of course. When stripped of power, he reached for the only thing he understood: ownership. Except this time, he couldn't own the narrative, because I had taken it back. The next day, I met Chloe for coffee. She looked worn out, her usual effortless poise frayed at the edges. "Mom's not talking much," she said. "Brandon's furious. And Dad? Well, he spent most of last night calling people, trying to spin it." "Spin what? That his daughter called him out with DNA proof?" She smiled, but it was hollow. "He's saying you staged it, that you're confused, that it's a publicity stunt." Classic. She reached across the table, touched my hand. "Ava, I'm sorry. I should have said something years ago." "It's not your fault," I said. "You survived the way you had to." She nodded. Then, hesitating, she added, "Do you want to know something wild?" "What?" "I think deep down, I always knew you didn't belong to him. You don't move like him, don't talk like him. And God knows you don't try to impress him." "Maybe I did for longer than I should have." "Yeah, but not anymore." There was silence between us for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that settles when a wound is finally being aired out. When I returned to the hotel, there was one more message waiting, from my mother. There was someone, before Gerald, someone I never told you about. Can we talk? That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the city glowing beyond the curtains. I didn't know what I would say to her, or to him, or to the man whose DNA I apparently carried. But I knew this. I was done performing. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the one who had stepped into the center of the stage, ripped the script in half, and rewritten my own ending. And it started with driving away. The next morning, I met my mother in a quiet cafe off Union Street, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the cappuccinos came with little leaves drawn into the foam. She was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, sunglasses on despite being indoors, fingers twisting a napkin into a soft spiral. She stood when she saw me, but didn't reach for a hug. For the first time in my life, my mother didn't perform. She just looked like herself, slightly lost, a little older, completely real. "Ava," she said, voice gentle, breaking. "I'm so sorry." I sat. No greetings, no performance, just silence until she finally spoke again. "I should have told you years ago," she said, "but I was afraid it would destroy everything." "It destroyed me anyway," I said, not harshly, but with the tired honesty of someone who's done trying to protect anyone else's comfort. She nodded. "It was 1989, she began. I was 25, working as a research assistant at Stanford. Gerald had just started Sinclair Dynamics, but before him, there was someone else." She paused, glancing around the cafe like she still expected someone to be listening. "His name was Thomas Wilder. He was a visiting professor in applied mathematics. Brilliant, kind, a little awkward. We weren't supposed to be serious, but it happened quickly." She looked down at her coffee, swirling the spoon in the foam. "When I got pregnant, my parents panicked. They insisted it would ruin my future, that Thomas wouldn't stay, that a child born outside marriage would be a scandal." "So you left him," I said. "I didn't even tell him," she whispered. "I broke things off, lied about why, and within a month, they'd introduced me to Gerald. He was ambitious, well-connected, and most importantly, willing to marry me knowing I was pregnant." I sat with that. Let it sink in. "And he always knew?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes. He told me he could raise you as his own, that it wouldn't matter. But once you were born, Ava, you looked nothing like him. And everything like Thomas. The older you got, the more he resented you. He tried. At least I believed he did. But he just couldn't separate biology from love." I clenched my jaw. "So I spent my entire life being punished for something I didn't even know." "I thought I was protecting you," she said quietly, "but I was protecting myself. And your father's image. I failed you, Ava." There it was. The truth. Simple. Imperfect. Human. And still. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I sat in silence for a long while, staring at my untouched coffee. "Where is he?" I asked. "Thomas?" I nodded. "He lives in Seattle now. He's the co-founder of a clean energy firm, married, 3 kids." "And he doesn't know I exist?" "No," she said, her voice breaking. "He doesn't. But I looked him up recently. He's still in academia. Still lectures sometimes. You're a lot like him." We finished the coffee. Not everything was resolved, but something had shifted. For the first time, my mother and I were sitting across from each other as 2 flawed women, not as a daughter endlessly auditioning for love. Later that afternoon, I did something I never thought I would. I emailed Thomas Wilder. I kept it short. "Hello, my name is Ava Sinclair. I recently learned that you may be my biological father. I understand this may come as a shock, and I have no expectations, only a desire to understand where I come from. I'd be open to speaking if you are." I hit send and stared at the screen, waiting for the anxiety to crash in. It didn't. That night, I turned off my phone and walked to the rooftop of my hotel. The city lights blinked around me, and for once, I felt like I wasn't running from anything. I had no idea what would happen next. Whether Thomas would respond. Whether my relationship with my mother could be repaired. Whether the Sinclair family name would continue to chase me. But I knew this. The war was over. because I had finally stopped fighting for something that was never mine to win. The next morning, Gerald responded. Through his lawyer? A formal email. Short. Condescending. Return of property is expected by week's end. Legal action will be pursued otherwise. No acknowledgement, no ownership, just one final attempt at control. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to my attorney and made arrangements to return the Tesla, cleaned, detailed, with the title untouched. But not before I did one thing. I sold the car. Privately, through a connection, and I used the funds to seed something new, something that didn't bear the Sinclair name, an independent venture capital initiative, one that backs women-led tech startups, quiet, purposeful, mine. And then I delivered the paperwork to Gerald's estate with a typed note. You taught me that value is always about ownership. Thank you for showing me exactly what not to become. As I pulled out of the estate gates for what I knew would be the last time, I passed the security guard who used to greet me with, "Miss Ava." He smiled and nodded. But I wasn't Miss Ava anymore. I was Ava Wilder. I hadn't changed it legally. Not yet. But in my mind, the shift had happened. I was no longer the daughter chasing his legacy. I was the woman reclaiming her own. 2 days after I sent the email, I received a reply. Thomas Wilder. The subject line was simple. Hello? His message was cautious but warm. Ava, I don't know how to begin this message except to say that I've read yours over and over. I never knew about you. But if what you're saying is true, and I have no reason to doubt it, I'd very much like to talk. I'll be in San Francisco next month for a symposium at Berkeley. If you'd be open to meeting, perhaps we could start there. With care, Thomas. I stared at the screen for a long time. No denial, no defensiveness, just humanity. I replied the next morning. We made a plan to meet for coffee in a quiet neighborhood cafe near Golden Gate Park. I didn't know what I was expecting. Tears? Tension? Awkward silences? What I got was something altogether different. He looked like me. Same eyes, same expressive hands, same way of leaning forward slightly when listening. And when he said my name, Ava, it didn't sound like it was being forced into a mold that didn't fit. We talked for 3 hours, about nothing and everything. He told me about his work, his family, his love for hiking and jazz piano. I told him about finance, about New York, about how I used to believe I had to win people just to be allowed to exist. We didn't talk about fatherhood or labels, not yet. But by the time we said goodbye, I knew this. I wanted to know more. And for once, it wasn't about filling a void. It was about understanding where I came from, without shame, without fear. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, we've exchanged regular emails. We've had one long phone call. He sent me a photo of his family. No pressure, no expectations, just space, possibility. Meanwhile, things with my mother have shifted in quiet, slow ways. We meet once a week. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. But she's trying, and I can feel it. The weight of decades of silence has started to lift. Brandon hasn't reached out. I don't expect him to. He's firmly planted in Gerald's world, where bloodlines are business and weakness is unforgivable. Chloe, though, has become something I never thought she'd be, an ally. She checks on me, sends sarcastic memes, even helped me rename the investment project I launched. Wilder Fund. Not after me, after truth. We focus on underrepresented founders, especially women breaking into fields long dominated by men who look like my father. It's still early, but it's mine. Every now and then, I still get messages from Gerald's lawyer, mostly formal notices about damaged family reputation and veiled threats. My attorney handles those. I don't even read them anymore, because Gerald Sinclair no longer occupies space in my head. He never gave me a name. Not really. He gave me a set of chains disguised as expectations, a fortress of cold pride, of empty legacy, of illusion, and I've walked out of it, unchained. The morning I finalized the fund's first round of investments, I stood by the windows of my new office downtown. Light poured in across my desk, illuminating the small framed quote Maya had given me back when I nearly caved on returning the Tesla. What if you're not too much? What if they're just not enough? I smiled. For years, I'd contorted myself to fit a family that saw me as a burden, a threat, a mistake. I'd chased affection like a prize, mistaking rejection as a challenge to overcome. But love isn't earned through proof. It's not a performance. It's not a resume. It's quiet, steady, true. And it exists, sometimes, in the places we least expect. In sisters who stop apologizing and start standing up. In strangers who share your DNA and greet you with kindness instead of questions. In mothers who admit they were wrong and choose to show up anyway. It exists in the self too, when you stop trying to be good enough and simply allow yourself to be you. This year, I won't be attending the Sinclair brunch, or sending a Father's Day card, or trying to justify why I chose a different path. This year, I'll be hiking up Mount Tamalpais with Thomas and his 2 daughters, my half-sisters, though I'm not sure what to call them yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe just their names. We'll drink coffee from thermoses, talk about tech and books and trail mix, laugh, hopefully, and no one will ask me to prove that I belong, because I do. Not because of blood, but because I chose this. And if you're listening to this wondering whether you should walk away from a family that only loved the version of you that performed, let me say this. Sometimes walking away isn't abandonment. It's self-rescue. Sometimes healing means rewriting your origin story. Not erasing the pain, but refusing to carry it any longer. Sometimes your real family isn't the one who raised you. It's the one you find when you finally stop auditioning. So here I am, 33, Wilder, not Sinclair, and finally, free.